It was a crisp autumn morning in Brooklyn when Jason Turner, a well-dressed landlord in his mid-40s, strolled through the hallways of the apartment complex he owned. His building, a 5-story structure nestled between two busy streets, was his pride and joy. Jason had been managing it for years, enjoying the power and control that came with being the landlord. But there was one tenant in particular who always rubbed him the wrong way. Gregory Martin, a black man in his late 20s, had been living in the building for 3 years. Jason had never quite understood why Gregory didn't seem to respect him the way the other tenants did. There were always late rent payments, complaints about the heating system, and issues with noise. Despite his efforts to keep things in check, Gregory often pushed back, making Jason feel his authority was being questioned. Today, Jason had a plan. Gregory had missed yet another rent deadline, and Jason had had enough. He decided that it was time to give Gregory a lesson in respect. Jason knocked firmly on Gregory's door, his knuckles rapping against the wood. He stood there, waiting for a response, as his mind raced with the speech he would give. "Mr. Martin," Jason called out, his voice cutting through the silence. "It's Jason Turner, your landlord. We need to talk." The door creaked open, revealing Gregory, dressed in a simple hoodie and sweatpants. He gave Jason a confused look, his brow furrowed. "Mr. Turner," Gregory greeted him coolly. "What's going on?" Jason crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "I've given you enough chances, Gregory. You've been late on your rent too many times, and the complaints about noise and maintenance are piling up. It's time you moved out. I'm starting the eviction process today." Gregory blinked, his expression unreadable. "Eviction?" he repeated, as if the word didn't quite register. "You can't just evict me like that, Mr. Turner." Jason's smile grew smug. "Watch me." But as Jason turned to leave, something strange caught his eye. A stack of official-looking papers sitting on the kitchen counter through the open door. His curiosity piqued. He couldn't help but take a closer look. The words on the papers sent a chill down his spine. They were documents confirming the sale of the building. To Gregory Martin. "Wait a minute," Jason said, his voice faltering as he turned back to face Gregory. "What is this?" Gregory stepped back into the apartment, his face shifting into a calm expression. "You're looking at the ownership papers, Mr. Turner. I just bought the building." Jason's stomach dropped. He had to be hearing things. This wasn't possible. "You bought the building?" Jason stammered. Gregory nodded, his eyes steady. "I did. And as of today, you work for me." Jason stood frozen in place, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The thought of Gregory, the man he had always seen as beneath him, owning the entire building was unimaginable. How could he, a tenant with no real power, suddenly be in charge? "You're joking, right?" Jason finally managed to say, his voice shaking. Gregory smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile Jason was used to seeing. It was calm, measured, and tinged with a quiet confidence. "No joke, Mr. Turner," Gregory replied, his tone cool but firm. "I've been negotiating for months. You just didn't know about it because I didn't want to stir the pot until everything was finalized." Jason felt his palms begin to sweat. His whole world seemed to be crashing down around him. He had never imagined a scenario where Gregory would have the upper hand. Jason had always thought of himself as superior, the one who had control. Now it was clear that he had misjudged everything. "You can't just buy a building out from under me," Jason protested, his voice rising in frustration. "I'm the landlord here. I've been running this place for years. You're just a tenant. What's next? Are you going to turn everything upside down?" Gregory's expression softened, though there was a flicker of something dangerous behind his eyes. "I didn't come here to cause trouble, Mr. Turner. But I will make changes. This building, this entire community, deserves better than what it's been getting. And that includes better management. Starting with you." Jason's heart raced as his mind tried to process the overwhelming news. His reputation, his authority, all of it was suddenly in jeopardy. How could he have been so blind? "You're going to regret this," Jason muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Gregory. Gregory heard the words, but he didn't respond with anger. Instead, he simply took a step toward Jason, his voice low and controlled. "We'll see, Mr. Turner. We'll see." The following days were a whirlwind for Jason. After the shock of learning that Gregory was now the building's owner, he tried to salvage his position. But it wasn't easy. The news spread like wildfire through the building. Tenants who had once whispered complaints about the conditions of the complex now had new hope. Gregory wasted no time in making his presence felt. He called meetings with the tenants, introduced himself as their new boss, and assured them that things were going to change. No more late-night noise complaints ignored. No more broken appliances left unrepaired for weeks. No more dismissive landlords who didn't care. Jason, on the other hand, felt increasingly marginalized. He still came into the office every day, but it was no longer his office. Gregory had taken over the building's management office, and Jason was relegated to a small corner in the back. Every time Jason passed by the main office, he could see Gregory sitting behind the desk, speaking with tenants, signing papers, and making decisions that Jason used to make. It was a stark reminder of how quickly the balance of power had shifted. One afternoon, Jason was summoned to Gregory's office. As he walked in, he noticed the stark contrast between the space he used to occupy and the sleek, modern office Gregory had set up. The walls were adorned with motivational quotes, and the desk was clean, polished, and neat. Everything about it screamed professionalism. "Take a seat, Mr. Turner," Gregory said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. Jason took a seat reluctantly, his eyes scanning the room. "What is this about? You're really going to treat me like your employee now?" Gregory leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the desk. "Yes, Mr. Turner, I am. And as your new boss, I need you to understand something clearly. I'm here to make this place better. But you're not the one to do it. Your days of running things like they're your personal kingdom are over." Jason's pulse quickened. He had never felt so powerless in his life. "You don't know how to manage a building like this. You don't have the experience." Gregory's eyes met his with an intensity that sent a shiver down Jason's spine. "I have more experience than you think, Mr. Turner. And now, I'm in charge. I suggest you start acting like you know that." Jason gritted his teeth, his pride taking a hit. But there was nothing he could do now. Gregory had already won. The following weeks were an eye-opening experience for Jason. He continued to work in the building, but the respect he had once commanded was gone. Tenants, who had once avoided him, now greeted Gregory with enthusiasm and admiration. They trusted him. They saw him as someone who understood their needs, who had their best interests at heart. It was a stark contrast to how they had felt about Jason, distant, condescending, and uninterested in their struggles. Gregory had immediately started making changes, fixing the long neglected issues around the building. Broken windows were replaced, faulty plumbing was repaired, and the heating system that had caused so many complaints was finally upgraded. Tenants who had been forced to live in discomfort for years now felt heard, appreciated, and taken care of. Gregory had a way of making people feel seen, a quality Jason had never quite understood. One evening, as Jason walked past the main office, he overheard a conversation between Gregory and a tenant, Mrs. Edwards, who lived on the top floor. She had been one of the most vocal about the building's issues, constantly sending complaints that Jason would ignore. "Thank you so much for fixing my heating, Gregory," Mrs. Edwards said, her voice full of gratitude. "I can finally sleep at night without worrying about freezing. You've really turned things around here." Gregory smiled warmly. "It's my pleasure, Mrs. Edwards. I'm just glad I could help." Jason felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by his frustration. It wasn't fair. He had spent years managing the building, and now Gregory was swooping in, making him look incompetent. The following day, Jason was summoned to Gregory's office once again. This time, Jason had a bit more defiance in his step, determined to stand his ground, even though he knew Gregory had the power now. Gregory was sitting at his desk, looking through a stack of paperwork when Jason entered. Without looking up, he spoke. I need you to finalize the tenant contracts for the new rent schedule, Mr. Turner. And if you could make sure the maintenance team addresses the lighting issue in the hallway on the second floor, that would be great. Jason stood in the doorway, seething. You're making me do the dirty work now, huh? He muttered, not able to keep the bitterness from his voice. Gregory finally looked up, his calm demeanor unwavering. I'm not making you do anything, Mr. Turner. I'm asking. But since you're still working for me, it's your job to ensure things get done. And honestly, you're lucky I'm even giving you that much. I could have terminated your position, but I'm offering you a chance to prove yourself useful. Jason clenched his fists. The words stung, but there was little he could do. I'm not finished here yet, Jason said quietly, though his tone was filled with a mix of frustration and disbelief. Gregory stood up, his expression now serious. I think you are, Mr. Turner. You've had your chance. Now I'll be taking the lead, and I suggest you get used to it. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is this building. So either work with me, or I'll find someone else who will. Jason felt the weight of the reality settling in. He was no longer the one calling the shots. Gregory was in control, and Jason had no choice but to accept it. Weeks turned into months, and Jason's life seemed to spiral out of his control. His former arrogance had given way to frustration and resentment. Every day was a constant reminder that he had underestimated Gregory, and now he was paying the price. He found himself doing menial tasks, delivering notices to tenants, arranging for repairs, even cleaning up the messes left behind by the maintenance crew. It was a far cry from the position of power he had once held. His pride had been crushed, and there was no way to claw his way back. One morning, Jason stood in front of the building's large, outdated mailboxes, fuming as he stared at the stack of eviction notices he was supposed to hand out to tenants who hadn't paid on time. Gregory had insisted on a more strict approach to late rent, and Jason had to follow through with it, but every part of him resisted. How could he hand out eviction notices when he was the one who was supposed to be evicted in the first place? But as he stood there, contemplating his next move, something unexpected happened. Gregory approached, his footsteps calm but confident. Jason didn't turn to face him immediately, but he could hear the quiet power in Gregory's stride. Mr. Turner, Gregory said, breaking the silence, I see you're busy with your work. I just wanted to remind you that the residents are our priority. You're doing fine so far, but I need to see more leadership from you. This building deserves that. Jason slowly turned to face Gregory, feeling a mix of disbelief and confusion. Leadership? You want me to lead this place after everything that's happened? Gregory nodded. I do. You've got the experience, Jason. You just have to stop thinking of me as your boss. We're a team now. I need you to step up, and I think you can. The words hit Jason like a ton of bricks. He had never considered this possibility. For so long, he had thought of Gregory as the other, the tenant who had somehow bested him. But now, as the realization sank in, Jason knew that Gregory wasn't just a competitor. He was his equal. For the first time since he had lost control, Jason realized that he still had a place here. It wouldn't be as the domineering landlord he had once been, but maybe, just maybe, he could find a new role, one that didn't come with arrogance or superiority. Jason took a deep breath, looked Gregory in the eye, and nodded. All right, Gregory, I'll do it. I'll lead. I'm ready. Gregory smiled, his tone now one of encouragement. Good, because that's exactly what we need. As Jason walked away, he realized that the power he had once coveted wasn't the power that would bring him peace. It was a new kind of power, one that came from understanding, humility, and teamwork. And in that moment, he knew that his journey was far from over.